So we're going to learn all of these different concepts by creating a dad joke generator. So this program will create an array of strings containing 7 dad jokes. And for anyone who isn't really familiar with the term strings, it's essentially a data type that we use in Java. And the most basic definition of what strings are is just words. So whenever you hear Nithya or me sort of refer to strings throughout today's workshop, just know that we're referring to a data type of words. We're also going to be generating a random number from 0 to 6, and we're going to print out a random joke with its corresponding answer. So the online server that we're going to be using today to do most of our programming in Java is called REPL. So a lot of you already must have like a REPL account. If you do, then there's no need to make a new one. You can just use the one you already have. But for anyone who doesn't have a REPL account, we're going to go through how to create one together now. So the first step is to go to the link that you see on the screen, and Nithya will also paste that into the chat so it's easier for you to access. And then once you do that, you're going to click on Start Coding. And then after, you're going to complete the steps to create your own account, and then you're going to click on Java when it asks you for which language you want to program in today. So if we go to the next slide, here you can see what your screen will look like, and this sort of will give you a bit of a visual. So you'll see on your screen, you'll see Python, HTML, CSS, and JS, and then Java, and you're going to click on Java. Okay, so once you do that, your screen should look something like this. And here you're going to name your project and then start your project. So in that first box, you can obviously, when you're coding on your own, you can name your project whatever you want. But for today's workshop, we're going to ask that everybody name their project Dad Joke Generator. Either give us a thumbs up or you can say done in the chat so we know we can move on to the next bit of the workshop. Awesome. Just waiting on a few more people and then we can move on. Awesome. Okay, so while we wait for the last person to sort of catch up, I'm just going to start sort of going over our topics. And if you are having any troubles, feel free to interrupt me in between and I can try to help you through creating your REPL project. But before we start learning all of the previously mentioned topics of today, we're going to be starting with a brief overview of what object-oriented programming is and variables. So Java is a programming language which utilizes object-oriented programming. So in this type of programming, what we call a class would be a blueprint of an object. Similarly, this class would have functions, which we call methods in Java, and attributes, which we call variables. So these functions and variables represent a real-world system. We can create an object, which is an instance of a class, and then we can use these methods and variables in a class. So I know this is kind of a hard topic to wrap your head around, but we thought it would be easier to understand for everyone if we provided an example. So the example we thought of is the class called car. So some methods in this class would be get fuel or get speed. And you can see what those look like in code on your screen there. And some variables of this class are fuel and max speed. So to use methods and variables, we can create an object of the class and then use that object to run methods and use these variables. And that essentially is what object-oriented programming is. And again, if you're still a little bit confused, don't worry, because we're going to be sort of coding and going through this throughout the workshop, so you'll start to get a better idea of what this means by the end of the workshop. But for now, if anyone has any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat and we can again sort of go over this topic or explain it better if necessary. But if everyone is good, then we are good to move on as well. Okay, so Like we said before, attributes in our car class are called variables. So these variables will store data and they can change throughout the program. We can store values into variables so that we can access these values later on. In our program today, or our project today, we're going to be generating a random number. And in order to access that random number later on, we have to store it into a variable. So naming this variable, and giving it its data type is known as declaration, and giving the first value of that variable is known as initialization. So the Java syntax for declaring and initializing variables is on the screen there, so you can see it on the last line. But essentially what it is you're going to start by writing the data type, the name of the variable, and then it'll be equal to the data, and then it'll end with a semicolon. So we've also provided an example. So in our example, we see that the data type is integers or int. The name of the variable is number, and it is equivalent to 1. And it ends with a semicolon. And so quickly, just a quick reminder, whenever you're coding in Java, you're going to end every line of code with semicolon for the most part, because a semicolon will essentially just sort of denote the end of that line. Another thing to quickly note here is that the equal sign doesn't indicate that the left side is actually equal to the right side, but it's actually just the fact that whatever is on the right side gets stored into the left side, and that's because the variable is on the left side. So for in this instance, the data of 1 will get stored into the variable of number. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the chat or unmute and ask, but if not, do you have an example of doing the Java syntax, like the plugins? Right, so the plugins is right, so where it says example on your screen, so we have int number equals 1. So again, so there that's the data type is integers in this example, and then number is the name that we've given our variable, and then there's an equal sign, and then it's the data. So in this case, the data that we're storing into the variable called number is 1. We're also going to be having to declare and initialize variables throughout our code, and you'll see that as you type along with Nithya. But does that help? Awesome, perfect. Okay, so now that we've had a brief introduction to these concepts that are going to be implemented while we code, we can actually start creating our dad joke generator. So the first step of doing this is to understand arrays, and Nithya will go through that with you now.
Yeah. So an array is a container that stores multiple pieces of data of the same type. So for example, we can think of a grocery list. We know that grocery lists store grocery items, such as fruits. We can also think of a grocery list as a large the data in this which are strings. Let's say we wanted to create this grocery list in Java. To create arrays, we can state the data type of the array. In our case, that would be string, the name of the array, which would be grocery list for us, and the length of the array. Or if we know what pieces of data to store in the array, we can specify that also. So on the slide, you can see what I was talking about. We write string grocery list, and next to string, we see that we have our 2 square braces or 2 square brackets. This tells Java that we're creating an array and not a variable. So we write string our 2 square brackets, grocery list equal to, and then let's say that the fruits we wanted to include in our grocery list would be oranges, apples, bananas, mangoes, and pineapple. So because these are all strings, they're going to be in double quotation marks. Each piece of data is going to be separated by a comma, and they're all going to be stored in our curly braces, and it's going to be ending in a semicolon. So this is how we create arrays in Java. So state the data type, your square brackets, the name of your array, your equal sign, and then the data which you're going to store into your array to the right of the equal sign. So just as a little compare and contrast between arrays and variables, while variables store only one piece of data, arrays allow for storage of multiple pieces of data, as we can see in our grocery list example. Okay. So let's go back to our grocery list example. Let's say we wanted to access just bananas from our grocery list, so a singular piece of data from our array. To do this, we can use the indices of our array. In Java, we can recognize each piece of data in the array by a number. You can kind of think of that number as the name tag of that piece of data. This number is known as an index. Each piece of data in an array has an index. So just by looking at this table, you would think that oranges would have an index of 1 as it is the first piece of data in the array. But in Java, indices are numbered off starting at 0. So oranges would be at grocery list at 0, which we can see on the slide. So this is how we would write grocery list at 0. And that if we were to type this into our program, that would just basically give us oranges because it has an index of 0. So this means the last value of the array, pineapples, would be at the 4th index. So just as a rule of thumb, know that the last piece of data in an array in Java has the index of the length of the array minus 1. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat or by unmuting. So we decided to come up with some examples of using arrays while coding because arrays are very useful for programmers. So for example, a programmer might create a game, and that game may utilize arrays by having an array store all the usernames of that game. So instead of creating hundreds of variables to store each username, you just have one array. Or for example, a search engine may have an array that stores all of the users commonly browsed links in order to provide better search results. Or your teachers may use a software, and that software may use arrays to store the grades of each child in the class. Okay, so those are just some examples of using arrays, but now I want to do a quick little check-in to make sure you guys get the general idea of arrays. So let's say that there is a string array called names, so the name of the array is names, and it contains Bob and then Joe. At what index would Joe be at? And you can type this answer into the chat. Yes, okay, so I'm already seeing some answers in the chat, and yes, 1 is correct. This is because in Java, indices are numbered off starting at 0, so Bob would be at 0 and Joe would be at 1. And to create this array, I'm going to do a little annotation on the screen. So the first thing which we would do is state the data type of this array. And the data type would be string, so we would write string. Then after that, because it's an array, we would put our square brackets. And then we'd write the name of our array, and the name of our array is names. And then to the right of the equal sign, we'd put whatever we want to store into our array if we know what pieces of data are going to go into it, and we do. So that would be Bob. And then to separate each piece of data, we're going to put a comma. So Bob, comma, Joe, and then our ending curly braces and the semicolon. This is how we would create this array in Java. Let me quickly clear it. Okay. So now we're going to be using arrays in our program. So we're going to be doing a quick type along. So let us go to our dad joke generator program that you have created. So make sure you're typing along with me. In your dad joke generator program, you'll see this line that says system.out.println hello world. Don't delete that line as we'll be using this later on, but move on to the next line so that we can create our string array. We will be creating a string array called jokes that will store all of the jokes that our program can choose from in order to print. So to do this, the first thing which we're going to do is state the data type of our jokes. Because jokes are basically a bunch of words, they're going to be strings. So the data type of our array is string. So type in string onto your REPL project, brackets, array. Because it's going to store jokes, we'll just call it jokes. And then have your equal sign. To the right of the equal sign, we're going to put the data so that all that data is going to get stored into our array. And let me just put this in my colon. Okay. Because there are many jokes, so Hani's going to paste the jokes in the chat and you can just look at it as a little reference, but I'm going to be typing along on my screen so you can also watch me watch the screen. So the first joke is, what do sprinters eat before a race? So that is going to be the joke which would have the index of 0 in the array. And then we're going to put a comma, move on to the next joke, which is, why couldn't the bicycle stand up for itself? the comma outside of the double quotation marks, and make sure you're typing along with me. And then the joke, which is going to be at the second index of the jokes array, is want to hear the rumor about butter. And then we're going to put our comma. The next one is want to hear a joke about construction. Our comma, and then can February, March. Why is Peter always lying? Why is the vampire always sick? Okay. So like I said before, this string array will store all of the jokes that our program can randomly choose from to print onto the console. And once you're done typing this into your REPL project, I'll move over to this slide if it's clear to see. You can give me a thumbs up or type yes in the chat. Just waiting for a couple more people. Okay, so I'm going to be moving on to the next slide. Okay. So like I said before, we want to randomly print one of the 7 jokes in our dad joke generator. In order to do this, we can generate a random number from 0 to 6 and use that number to print a specific value of the jokes array. So for example, if we randomly generated 1, then we would print out jokes at 1. So in Java, there is a built-in class called math, which contains many different math methods and variables. For example, there are methods which allow you to take the square root of numbers, and there are also variables which allow you to access the value of pi. One method from the math class that we will be using today is the random method. This method generates one random decimal from 0.0 until 1.0, but not including 1.0. So like I said before, we want to generate a random whole number from 0 to 6. This means when we call our random method, we will have to manipulate the returned random number so that it produces a random number from our wanted range. So in order to do this, we can multiply the returned value the method gives us by 7 and convert it into a whole number. So to see what I was talking about, let's take an example. For example, if the random method, when we call it, if that generates 0.99, which is the largest number that the method could generate, we can multiply that by 7, which would give us 6.93. Then we can truncate that number, which would give us 6, the upper limit of our wanted range. Truncating basically means to get rid of all numbers after the decimal point, and we'll be showing you how to do that in Java later on. If the method generates 0.0, which is the smallest number that the method could generate, we can multiply that by 7, truncate it, and get 0, the lower limit of our range. So as you can see, all generated numbers, by multiplying it by 7 and converting it into a whole number, would be between our wanted range of 0 to 6. So in Java, it is useful to know how to call methods and manipulate return values to your liking, which is why we are learning about this. Also, so that we can use it in our dad joke generator program. So in order to generate random numbers, we're going to be utilizing methods and variables. So here are the steps for generating our random numbers. First, we can create an int variable called number to store our generated random number. So remember, this is known as declaration and initialization. So we declare and initialize our variable number. Then we're going to call the random method from the math class. The math class is accessible to all Java users of that class. In order to call that method, we'll multiply that by 7 and then convert this double, which is basically a decimal, into an int, which is our truncating. So we'll write int in parentheses in front of this expression. And like we said before, when talking about variables, whatever is to the right of the equal sign would get stored into the variable number. Okay. So now we will be doing this in our code. So if we go back to our dad joke generator, our first step was to declare and initialize our variable number, which is what we'll be doing. So to declare and initialize a variable, the first thing which we'll have to do is state the data type of our variable. We want number to store just whole numbers, so it will be an int. And then we'll say the name of our variable, which is number. And then when I initialize my variables, I like giving just a random number. So I'm just going to put -1 for now. Then after that, we want our number to store a random number from 0 to 6. So we're going to call the random method from the math class. So math.random. Then we're going to multiply that by 7. So that's just an asterisk 7. And then we're going to place int in parentheses in front of that expression. Then after that, that will give us a random number from 0 to 6. We're just going to store that value into our variable number, and don't forget to end it with a semicolon. And once you're done with this, you can type yes in the chat or give me a thumbs up. Okay, I think most people are done, so we can move on to the next slide. And we'll have a time later on today to catch up if you need to.
Okay, so we're going to kind of go back to what you saw when you first opened your REPL project. And you probably saw a line at the top that said system.out.println and then double parentheses, double quotations, and then hello world inside, and it ended with a semicolon. So if you go to your REPL page and you run this, and you're going to run it by just clicking the big green button at the top, you'll see that the line of code that is printed out onto your console is hello world. So that indicates to us that in order to print anything onto our console, we're going to need to use the Java syntax system.out.println, double parentheses, and double quotations. So now we're going to use this Java syntax to print out the string or the joke from our jokes array at the index, which will be randomly generated. So you can sort of type along with Nithya now, and I highly recommend following along, because this way, if you do make any mistakes or any errors, you'll be able to go through it with her. But you're going to delete that line of code that says system.out.println hello world. And you'll see Nithya typing system.out.println double parentheses jokes, which is our array, and then double square brackets, and then number, which is the name of our variable. So number in this case would store any random number from 0 to 6. So for example, to sort of get a better understanding of this, if that random number, that is like if 3 is stored into the variable of number, then jokes at number would give us jokes at 3, which would be the third joke in our array, or the joke at the third index of our jokes array. So in our case, this joke is want to hear a joke about construction. So as you can see, what we've done so far is print out a random joke. Now we need to print out the answer to that joke, which we're going to be doing through conditional statements. So conditional statements are the way in which we ask our computer to evaluate conditions. So most conditional statements, if not all, will begin with an if part, which tells the code what to do when a condition is true. The conditional statement will usually also have an else if following the if part, which will run when the if part is false and tells the code what to do if the second condition is true. And lastly, sometimes you'll also see an else following the if and the else if, and it'll tell the code what to do if both conditions are false. So to get a better understanding of this, again, Nithya and I have come up with a few examples of conditional statements that you see in your day-to-day life. So if it's raining, eat a snack, else wait until if you're sick, go to the doctor, else go to school, and if your phone is dead, then charge it. So to just sort of test if you guys have that like graspy understanding of what conditional statements are, we're going to ask that you type in a conditional statement that you kind of use on the daily to make a decision in your life. So it could be anything.
So any time in your life that you use conditional statements to make decisions, if you can think of any examples, then you can just put it in the chat.
Perfect. That's awesome. So that's a great example of a conditional statement. So Mina said, if you're bored, then play with your friends, else go to bed. Awesome. So now we're going to be using these conditional statements within our program. So again, these will print out the correct answer to the printed joke that we did earlier using system.out.println. So you can type along with Nithya, and if you fall behind or anything, we definitely have time for you to catch up later. So just try your best to stay caught up.
Mm-hmm. So in order to print out the correct answer to the joke, we would need to know what joke has been printed. And to know what joke has been printed, we would need to know what number our variable number stores. So let's say if number stores 0, then we would want to print out the answer to the jokes at 0. So because jokes at 0 would have gotten printed out, and the joke at the 0th index of the array is what do sprinters eat before a race? So if number stores 0, then we want to print out the answer to that joke. Now before we print out the answer to that joke, I want to explain what this double equal signs mean. So we call this equal to equal to. So this is basically a function which checks if the left side of the two equal signs is equal to the right side. So in other words, in our case, it would be checking if our variable number stores 0. So if that condition is true, it would print out the answer to the joke at the 0th index of the jokes array. So if number equal to 0, then it's going to print out the answer to what do sprinters eat before a race? And the answer to that would be nothing. They passed. Get it? So let's say that that condition is false, meaning that number does not store 0. Then if the previous condition was false, we would want to check, okay, does number store 1? So else if number equal to 1. So if number stores 1, that means the joke printed out was at jokes at number, or jokes at 1, meaning that it was the joke at the first index of the jokes array, which is why couldn't the bicycle stand up for itself? So if that was printed out, we would want to print out the answer to that joke, which is, was too tired. Now let's say that both above conditions were false. So number was not 0 and it was not 1. So that means we're going to check, okay, is number 2? So else if number equal to 2. So if this returns to us true, then we're going to print out the answer to the joke at jokes at 2. Jokes at 2 is the joke at the second index of our jokes array, which is want to hear the rumor about butter. So if that was printed out, we would want to print out, so system.out.println, the answer to that, which is, never mind, I don't want it to spread. This one's my favorite joke. So let's say that number was not equal to 0, it did not store 1, it did not store 2. Well then, so if those conditions were false, then we're going to check our next condition. So else if number equal to 3, that means the joke printed out was at the jokes at 3, which is the joke at the third index of our jokes array, which is want to hear a joke about construction. Well then, we're going to print out the answer to that joke, which is, I'm still working on it. So as you can see that I'm kind of repeating myself a lot, and this is because this is where all the concepts that we have learned so far comes together, which is why I'm repeating myself a lot, to make sure that these concepts kind of get into your head. So let's say that number did not store 0, it did not store 1, it did not store 2, nor 3. Then we're going to check our next condition, else if number equal to 4. If that condition is true, then it's going to print out the answer to the joke at jokes at 4, which is the joke at the fourth index of our jokes array. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to print out the no, April, May. Okay. So if all above conditions are false, so number is not 0, not 1, nor 2, nor 3, nor 4, then we're going to check else if number is equal to 5. Does number store 5? If number does store 5, that means the joke printed out was the joke at the fifth index of the jokes array. And that joke is, why is Peter Pan always flying? Well, the answer to this is because he never lands. Never lands. For those of you who don't get this joke, basically Peter Pan is from this place called Neverland, which is why this is kind of a punny joke. But yeah. So let's say that all above conditions were false. That means that the number generated was not 0, not 1, not 2, not 3, nor 4, nor 5. That means that the number generated must have been 6, meaning the joke printed out must have been at the sixth index of the jokes array. And that joke is, why is the vampire always sick? So else all above conditions, else all above conditions are false. Then we're going to print out, one second, let me just move it like this. I like it better like this. Then we're going to print out the answer to the joke, why is the vampire always sick? And the answer is because he's always coughing. Okay. So I'm going to move over to this slide so you can see the image more clearly. And once you're done typing all of these conditional statements, can I get a yes in the chat or a thumbs up? Also, when you are typing in REPL or typing in Java, make sure that every single time that a letter is capitalized or lowercase, make sure you type it exactly how you see it, because Java is case sensitive, meaning if you typed in lowercase system.out.println, that would cause an error. Is it an L or an I in the system.out.println? It is an L, println, yeah.
Okay, so it looks like most of us are caught up, and if not, the next slide here is sort of just allocated a few minutes for everyone to catch up. So we've provided on the screen the code that you should have on your REPL project, and if you are missing any of it or you find that you have any errors, feel free to refer back to this. Yeah, once everyone can give us a thumbs up, and then we can test our program together.
We'll wait for about 2 minutes for the check-in part, just to make sure that you're checking every single line and word to make sure that there's no errors. And if you, before the, let's say 3:45, if you have finished everything and you have checked everything, you can take some time to stretch a little, because yeah. Okay, I think we can move on.
Awesome. Okay, so now is your chance to test your program. So you're going to click on that big green button at the top, again, to run your program. And if it runs smoothly, great. So you've done the first part of your dad joke generator. And if you do have any errors, try to debug on your own. And again, if you do have any problems or questions, then again, ask us. We'll work through it with you. That's what we're here for. So, but yeah, so you can see on Nithya's screen what it should look like once, if it runs correctly. So awesome.
If there are any errors, make sure to notify us.
And then if not, we can move on to the second part of the project, which Nithya will walk you through.
Yes. So let's make our program just a little bit more advanced. We will modify our code to ask the user to enter a number from 0 to 6. Then we'll print out the joke at the user inputted number. So instead of printing a randomly generated joke, we'll be printing out the joke at the index of the user inputted number. So for example, if the user typed in 1, then we'd print out, here's joke number 1, and then the joke in the jokes array at the first index. So we will be doing this modified version of our dad joke generator in a new REPL. So copy all of your code in your dad joke generator REPL. So that would be Command C if you're on a MacBook, Control C if you're on a Windows or a Chromebook. Then after that, you're going to create a new REPL called dad joke generator part 2. Once you create it, paste all of that code into that dad joke generator part 2. So if you're on a MacBook, that's Command V, and if you're on a Windows or a Chromebook, that is Control V. So I will go to my REPL right now to show you how to do it. So you shouldn't have this. I don't know why that is there, but copy all of your code. So that's Command C because I'm on a Mac. And then you see this little circle with a tinier circle in the middle. Click on that icon. And then you're going to click on plus for create. We're going to choose Java and we're going to name it dad joke generator part 2. And once you name it dad joke generator part 2, click on create REPL. I have already created my dad joke generator part 2, which is why I'm not going to be clicking on create REPL, but you guys should click on this button. Okay. So once you click on that, you should get to a REPL that looks something like this and highlight all of the code. And if you're on a Mac, that's Command V to paste it. If you're on a Windows or Chromebook, that's Control V. So I'm going to paste all of my code into the dad joke generator part 2. And once you're done, you can give a thumbs up or a yes in the chat. Just as a reminder, when you're done, make sure to notify us so we know when to move on. Okay, I think we can start learning our next topic. So, like we said before, we want to get an input from the user. So the way to receive inputs from the user is through the use of the scanner class. So this is the second class which you guys are getting introduced to today. This class contains methods which allows coders to get input from the user. As we can see in this image, there are different methods to use for each data type we expect from the user. We are expecting the user to type in a number, specifically a number from 0 to 6. So we'll be using the nextInt method. As we can see in this image, this method, nextInt, will return to us the next integer value the user has typed into the console. So here are the steps for asking the user to choose a number using the nextInt method. First, we'll import the package which would contain the scanner class. Scanner is not a class that we have created, and it is not a class that is accessible to all Java users. So in order to create an object of that class, we must first import it. After importing it, we'll be able to create an object of that class, and using that object, we'll call the nextInt method. That method would give us the number the user has typed onto the console, and then we're going to store that number into a variable so you can use it later on. Okay, so now let's do this in our dad joke generator part 2. So our first step was to import the scanner class, and we're going to import it outside where it says class main. We're going to import it outside. So at the top of your dad joke generator part 2, outside of the main class, you're going to type import java.util.scanner. This line of code will allow you to create an object of the scanner class. Okay. After doing that, we're going to create our scanner object. So in order to create a scanner object, the first thing which you'll have to do, in order to create any object, the first thing which you're going to have to do is state the class in which the object is going to come from. So you're going to type in scanner, because we're creating an instance of the scanner class. And then after that, you're going to state the name of your object. Let's call it keyboard. And then to the right of the equal sign, you're going to say new scanner and your open close parentheses. So this is the general Java syntax for creating objects. You state the class, the name of your object, and then new class, your parentheses, semicolon, to the right of the equal sign. So sometimes you will have to input parameters in between these parentheses, which is what we have to do in our scanner class. So inside of these parentheses, type system.in. So we need to tell our scanner object where to look for the input, and system.in represents the console. So by writing this, our scanner object will know where to find the user input. After doing that, we're going to create our user number variable. So we're going to declare and initialize a variable called user number. So basically what we did with our number variable. So int user number, and then I'm just going to initialize it with a random number like -1. You can also delete these two lines here because we already have our program which generates a random joke in your dad joke generator part 1. So we'll delete these two lines. Okay, so now we've created our object and we've declared and initialized our user number variable. Now we're going to prompt our user to enter in a number so that they know that they should actually enter a number. So we're going to print out onto the console, choose a number from 0 to 6. Then after typing that, the next thing which we're going to do is store the entered number in our user number variable. So in order to get the number from that the user has typed into the console, we'd have to call the next int method using our keyboard object, or scanner object, which is called keyboard. So we'll say keyboard.nextInt, and then we're going to store that, whatever value that gives us, into user number. So now, if we were to run this, user number would store the number the user has typed into the console. And now that we have that number, we can print out the joke at that user number, and we can also print out, here is joke number, and then what the user number stores. Here is joke number, we put a space, and then outside of the quotation, a plus sign and user number. So the reason we didn't include user number inside of those quotations is because we don't want the actual word user number to get printed out. We want the value inside of user number to get printed out. So if the user has typed in 1, we want here is joke number 1 to get printed out. And from there, wherever you see number, replace it with user number because our number variable doesn't exist anymore. So we'll copy, we see number. So I'll scroll up here, and once you guys are finished typing everything in, or if you have any questions, make sure to notify me. And once you're finished typing everything in, you can type yes in the chat. Okay, awesome. We'll just wait for a couple more people. Okay. So now let's try testing out our modified program. So let's go to our REPL page and you see this big green button. You're gonna click on that. And then REPL takes some time to compile. Okay, so it asks us to choose a number from 0 to 6. So you can type in any number from 0 to 6 into the chat, and I'll type this into the project. 4, okay. So it says, here is joke number 4. Can February March? No, but April May. So if you got it to work, congrats, you made a successful dad joke generator not once, but twice. And if there's any issue with either version of your dad joke generator, make sure to notify us to the chat or by muting so that we can help out. I'm gonna run it again because it's fun. Okay. So today we went over printing methods by generating a random number, conditional statements, arrays, and objects through the use of the scanner class. So you guys learned so much today, so congratulations.
Okay, so thank you so much for attending our workshop. We really hope you got to learn something new from all of the different concepts we touched on. Nithya and I are always holding workshops for CodeNovate, so you can definitely check out our website for upcoming events or any new workshops. CodeNovate also has workshops teaching different languages, so if Java really isn't for you, we teach a lot of different languages from like MIT App Inventor or Python as well. And yeah, so Nithya will leave the chat for both CodeNovate, and you can also check us out on it's that are happening.
Yep. Thank you so much for attending today's workshop. We really hope you learned something new and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.
Again,